The global south, and
Right.
this is an interesting development that happened as far as India is concerned. uh, I believe it raised a lot of eyebrows in the West, because the call for Ukraine in the United Nations got 113 or 120 votes. The call by India for a meeting for global south got 123 countries. And
Hmm.
that's interesting. That's the United Nations, and this is a single country, India, which is calling people to for it to become the voice of global south, not even the leader.
Right. Right.
What is the thought process behind that, and how does economics play into this particular game?
Okay. I'm not too sure economics plays in India's favor. It has happened in spite of economics. Let me
So,
explain. The fact that we got so many votes and the West got so little also points to the inconsistency of the West when it comes to global issues. You have done Saddam, you have done in Iraq, you proceeded to do a Libya, you proceeded to do a Syria, and then you expect the people to say, yeah, look, this is this basically unbridled aggression going on, please join us. Then there is a certain degree of cynicism when it comes to those kind of calls, especially when you consider the fact that the West had promised that the NATO would not expand beyond a certain limit. You made agreements with the USSR, the erstwhile USSR, followed by Russia, regarding the limits of NATO expansion, and then you violated every one of them because, as George Bush said, we don't care, we won the Cold War.
mhm.
Okay, after some time, you have a new kind of leadership, which, unlike Yeltsin, doesn't really give a damn, and it waited. It waited for the aggressive presidency of George Bush to be over. It waited for a time when the United States had overextended itself, and then it started to do the pushback. Let us face it, the Russians have done in Ukraine is cannot be supported, it's condemnable. But let us face it, what has happened in Ukraine? When the Ukrainians got a president who was pro-Russia, but he was elected through an election whose results cannot be disputed, you started a so-called Orange Revolution to basically turf him out. So, in a sense, who has violated Ukrainian sovereignty? Russians, certainly, but don't say the West has also not violated that particular
Yeah, yeah.
sovereignty. So, in this situation where nobody is sinless, for you to say, "Yeah, support us vis-a-vis the Russians," is not likely to get that many calls. And let us face it, the global south was also afraid of offending the Russians. The Russians, in
Absolutely.
that sense, are forthright. So you would not want to offend the Russians either. So that counts for the lack of support that the West got. When it comes to India, look, India has always played at the margins. I mean, I think our years of grandstanding is over. But the things that we have raised over a period of time, and let me start, say, from the Doha round of the WTO. You
Mm.
know, the Doha round of the WTO, which so far was becoming a rich man's agenda or failing, finally became the development agenda because of the stance that India took vis-a-vis a number of issues, particularly public health. And ironically, in the Doha round, the country that supported us was Pakistan. You know, Murasoli Maran, along with one bureaucrat, he single-handedly threatened to bring the Doha round to a close until the minimum that India asked was agreed upon.
Agreed.
And
Mm.
ultimately, India got what it wanted. Okay. Unfortunately, we forget about the contribution of Murasoli Maran. His name should be written in golden letters. So after that, of course, Cancun was a failure. But what we have done is basically raise those issues, fairness in trade, public health, and so on and so forth, which the global south, which finds resonance in the global south. You don't find us, grandstanding. You don't find us following predatory trade practices. And there are certain things we have done. For example, this rupee trade, something which I'm extremely excited about. Look, a lot of African countries want to trade with India.
Hmm.
They could trade with India if they accepted Indian rupees.
Yeah.
Now, if they accept Indian rupees, what do you think they will do with this Indian rupees? They will buy Indian goods.
Hmm.
See, this rupee trade is also a very good way to boost domestic exports. And if you are able to do it, if it kicks on, great things. So what I'm trying to say is, if you look at India's development initiatives, our vaccine diplomacy, all this has led to a position or situation where India's call for support finds more traction than Western calls for support. And by the way, it has also happened at a time when we are the fifth largest economy in the world. So it's not
Hmm.
as if we don't have
It's the time.
global economic clout. We have economic clout, not that great an economic clout, but certainly more than the likes of England, etc., whose ability, whose proclivity to appeal to its former colonies to come and vote alongside it does not cut ice any longer.
That's a very interesting answer that you've given, sir. But there's a follow up to this. You mentioned
Yeah,
Africa.
yeah,
Any particular reason that you've mentioned Africa? Because there is talks of rupee trade which is happening all over the world. I mean, there are loads of
absolutely,
countries which are talking about it. Why
absolutely.
did you pick up Africa in particular? Because right now we've had Minister Jaishankar coming back from Uganda, and there's obviously a lot of friction between the African nations and the Europeans, which was seen by these videos which are flying around the
Right,
place.
right.
Why did you take the example of Africa? That's very curious to me, sir.
You see, the question is the following. We are a large market.
Hmm.
India is a large market. But this is a dialogue we keep on telling the Europeans. This is a dialogue we keep on telling the Americans. But this is a dialogue we should also tell to the Africans. See, by the way, we buy oil from Angola. We buy a lot of minerals from Africa. But the question is, if there are other goods to be procured from Africa, let us open our things to them. We are a very powerful exporter to Kenya. Our exports to Uganda are also very, very high. But the same logic, if we are not to follow predatory trade, we should also allow these economies to export to India.
Yeah.
Now, our trade with Angola, in a sense, is not balanced because we buy oil from Africa, oil from Angola. We don't export much to it. Now the question is, if we want to balance this particular trade, our either their exporters have to be extra dynamic, or our exporters have to be extra dynamic. So far, we have not seen this dynamism. But when we push for rupee trade, we give a fillip to that particular trading impulse. So we tell the Africans, "Yeah, sell to our country, our rupees le jao. We can pay in rupees. It's easy." So let them come over and try to see what they have. If they're already selling to us, they'll try to sell more.
More.
Paying in rupees should be much easier. And if you are taking rupees from us, dekh lo hamare desh se kya kharid sakte ho, and take it back. So Africa is an underexploited area. The Chinese have exploited Africa to the hilt, so much so that many African countries, in a sense, have started to resent this kind of presence. We've never done this. The voluntariness of our trade efforts, I think, is there for the world to see. So we start with a cleaner slate than either the Europeans or the Chinese.
How do you see the African countries coming to us for helping them out in terms of balancing their deficit? This is an interesting development, and that's the reason why I picked up the Africa question, is
Look,
because there is a
we
lot which is happening there.
we cannot balance their deficit.
You can't. You
At
can't.
the end, each country, in a sense, has to basically step up to it
Exactly.
and balance. What we can do is ensure openness, access. Okay,
Sri Lanka.
I believe I believe we do give access. The rupee trade, in my opinion, makes it stronger.
Yes.
So you tell them, yeah, you want to export to them, yeah, export. Yeah,
Save your
rupees se
dollars.
lo. Absolutely.
Thank you for bringing that also, because a lot of people are speculating about it, and I think this particular dialogue will clarify a lot.
Look, it's like this. These are early days yet. A
Yeah,
lot
yeah,
of
of course.
people have said, We are not an export powerhouse. How can we have rupee trade? The rupee trade, in a sense, ensures that is one of the reasons that ensures, or the dollar trade ensures, one of the reasons that the USA is such a large importer is because there is dollar trade. It is because no matter what the intrinsic value of the dollar is, I keep on accepting dollars. Okay. So with those dollars, I basically want to hold it on. It's a reserve currency. So that basically makes exporting to the United States a very attractive proposition. And that is why the United States keeps on printing dollars and basically gives it to the rest of the world.
Is it?
Hopefully, India won't do that. So the question is, since the rupee is no longer not necessarily not a reserve currency, people will use the rupee for something, and that is to buy. And if they use the rupee to buy Indian goods, then what happens is, because you're allowing rupee trade, your exports will also go up. This is a difference between our rupee trade and the dollar trade that exists today.